Here's a forest that burned about 3 or 4 years ago. Did it hurt the forest? Uh, let's find out. Let's take a closer look. You can see that there's trees that are burned on the outside, but when you look up, they're still alive and healthy. I was told a few years ago that the indigenous elders in this area, when their grandparents were children, they used to be able to ride a horse from one community to another, many kilometers away. But you can see how the forest has grown in so much that it wouldn't be possible to ride a horse through here now. So the town and the local First Nation and the BC Wildfire Service and some other concerned people, including the community forest, were quite concerned about the risk of wildfire coming into the town. And so they mapped out areas of high risk where the forest had been growing for many decades without any thinning out. Normally what would happen in this area, in kind of a drier area away from the oceans, the trees would grow in, but every so often, say 8 to 25 years, a fire would come through and thin out the forest naturally. Sometimes not naturally. Sometimes those fires were deliberately lit by indigenous people for thousands of years. The forest evolved over many thousands of years to coexist with fire, and many species for trees and plants and animals, depending on the rejuvenating cycle of renewal that a fire would bring and thin out the trees. In the last 50, 100 years or so, our society has been putting out fires. We demonized fire, and we said it was bad because it was destroy things, forests and the animals, and bad for water quality, and was a risk to human life. And so we had a policy of putting out all fires by 10 a.m. the following morning. And we were very, very successful as a society in doing that. What we didn't realize is that it would create decades of growth because the forest continues to grow, especially in the absence of fire. And that created conditions where forests were overcrowded. They were growing close together, the branches were intertwined, there wasn't much light and coming down to the ground where the plants could grow. And when you open it up through thinning, it really allows lots more light and nutrients to come down. It grows berries, seeds from the grasses. That then in turn provides lots of food for small animals and rodents and a lot of other animals and plants that live lower in the food chain. That then provides food for other animals and more browse for deer. And then the more deer there are, then the healthier the cougar populations are. And the whole ecosystem thrives. But it all depends on this fairly regularly reoccurring regime of wildfire coming and rejuvenating an area. And so when that doesn't happen, we get very thick, overcrowded forests. And from a distance, it looks like a continuous green carpet of thick trees, and it looks beautiful. But what we didn't realize for many, even as professional managers in the forest, didn't realize that it was creating an unnatural forest. Those trees, when they don't have enough light and they don't have enough moisture, they become stressed. And when they're stressed, they are more susceptible to disease, insects, and fire. So after a lot of discussions within the community, a consensus was reached around the need to thin out these forests around the edge of town. And the reason why a consensus was reached is because the vast majority of people agreed that there was a need to restore more natural conditions, and that would mean thinning the forest out, reintroducing prescribed or cultural fire to maintain fewer trees and allow for more natural ecosystem processes to take place. So the first step after creating the plan was to implement the prescription. And the prescription was to thin out the forest using mechanized logging equipment. And they did that. You can see that there's now spaces between the trees. there's gaps between the tree tops, and there's not many, if any, smaller trees. And the reason that's important is because all three of those things achieve three different objectives in the treatment. Number one, reduce the amount of fuel. If you can imagine if you can imagine a campfire, the more wood you put on the campfire, the hotter it burns and the higher the flames are. The second objective was to eliminate what's called ladder fuels. So you can have a fire, low intensity fire, creeping along the ground, and it's good. It's good for the ecosystem, and it's easily controllable when the flames are small and just creeping along the ground. And so by removing the ladder fuels, you reduce the risk of the fire going from the ground up into the treetops. Because when it gets into the treetops and starts jumping from one tree to the next tree, it becomes a raging crown fire. And if it's burning really hot with flames hundreds of feet into the air, there's not much that anybody can do except get out of the way. And those are the most destructive and catastrophic fires. The third objective is to create gaps between the tree tops. So before the thinning happened, the branches from one tree were intertwined with another tree, and it was easy for the fire to travel from one tree to the next. By creating gaps, like up to 6 meters in between one tree to the next, made it much more difficult. If a fire did get into one tree, it was difficult to get into the next tree. And so it tends to keep the fire on the ground. So after the loggers came in and they did a first pass, and they used all the trees that could be, the wood that could be made into high value lumber or plywood or other products that have value in the marketplace. And then what was left over was the little bits and pieces, the chunks, the branches, the bark that really isn't suitable for a lot of things. Sometimes you can make pulp and paper out of it from the wood, or sometimes you can just make green bioenergy from burning it in a biomass facility, which is what happens in this town. They have the capacity to produce enough electricity for up to 50,000 homes each year. And in the town and the surrounding community, there's probably only 12,000 homes in total. So the community can produce a surplus of electricity, which can then go onto the grid to help other communities utilize a source of bioenergy. So after the loggers took all the logs that they could from the thinning treatment, and after the bioenergy folks took all the biomass that they could utilize, then the local First Nation came in and did an understory burn. So that's how this fire started. It was started by people, very deliberately, under controlled conditions. In the shoulder season, not during the depths of a drought. And they did it when the moisture conditions were right. But this very light burn did a lot of great things. You can see all these little tree seedlings that have grown up. Because there's more light and there's more moisture reaching the ground. Before the thinning, this was a very shaded forest. You could hardly walk through here without getting all scratched up. But now there's lots of space and light and nutrients for all the plants and animals. There's more bird life than there was prior to the treatment. And also very important for the local citizens is a dramatically reduced risk of catastrophic wildfire. Create a legacy for the future. Environmentally, because these trees that are now left here, and they have room to grow, and they will get bigger, and they're healthy. As they grow and get bigger, they will sequester carbon from the atmosphere, and that will help reduce greenhouse gases in the long term. The use of the woody material that otherwise would have decayed and become a source of carbon emissions into the atmosphere, by using it in long-term building products like lumber and houses or in furniture and things like that, that carbon is stored and not being emitted into the atmosphere for decades or even hundreds of years to come. So that's another environmental benefit that the workers involved in the project were very proud of. And then thirdly, the bioenergy, the heat and the electricity that was produced from the biomass that was liberated from this site through mechanical harvesting of the trees allows the creation of energy that can be used to, it can be sold to other jurisdictions in the US or other provinces in Canada. And that energy can often or sometimes displace energy that otherwise would have been produced by fossil fuel. So if a place was getting electricity from burning natural gas, for example, that's not a sustainable source of energy. It's cleaner than most other fossil fuels, but it's still a fossil fuel. Whereas the wood from the trees is organic and is perpetually sustainable, and you can just continue to grow and harvest that wood and create energy from it. And that's something that the local workers in the forest here are very proud of.